Hey guys, what's up? It's Collegio. Today I want to talk about Jimmy Kimmel. You haven't heard, the late night host has been indefinitely suspended from his show on ABC because of jokes that he made about Charlie Kirk's assassination. So firestorm was set off, the FCC, the federal government was involved, big corporate publicly traded companies were involved. I used to work in the TV industry, so I think I have a perspective here that's worth getting into, and I'm going to give an ultra-realist take on what I think is going on because I think that what's really happening is not being reported in the media. At least I suspect that it's not. But first, for some background, on Monday evening, Kimmel gives this monologue, one of his comedic monologues, and he makes fun of Trump on Charlie Kirk, and then he says something along the lines of, it was a joke about how it was MAGA Republicans who were responsible for killing Kirk, which was not funny. It was kind of bizarre. I saw this clip, it had come up on my feed, and because it was factually wrong, I thought that he was going to have to correct it on the air and maybe issue an apology. I was not expecting him to get fired over this. So here's what happened. The FCC chairman, Brendan Carr, the FCC, of course, is the government agency, the Federal Communications Commission, that oversees the broadcast airwaves. He gets on a podcast with conservative influencer Benny Johnson, and he says, ABC needs to do something about Kimmel, otherwise the FCC is going to get involved. Now, the threat there, the implicit threat, is that the FCC has power over ABC's license, all right? Basically, the FCC regulates the spectrum. The broadcasters operate on licenses to use that spectrum. They get those licenses for free, by the way. And the threat is basically, if they don't do something, we're going to basically destroy your business. Now, this is super heavy-handed stuff, and I don't like it. I wish the Trump administration had not taken this step, and I think it's critical for Republicans to be critical of this because you do not want the government policing one-off comments by people on the broadcast airwaves. If there's like serial cases of something happening, but to police comedy and speech is a really, really bad precedent, and I hate that it's happening. But what's interesting to me about this case is that ABC capitulated so quickly. And none of the explanations that I've seen explain why ABC didn't go to the mat. Because these types of things happen from time to time. You might remember back in 2004, there was a Super Bowl halftime show with Janet Jackson. There was some indecent exposure during the halftime show. CBS was involved in a 4-year lawsuit against the federal government over this issue, and the fine was eventually vacated. So to me, I'm like, well, why on earth would ABC just fold in like 6 hours? It was crazy. I just never seen anything like that before. So the background, again, FCC chairman makes a threat. 2 big broadcast companies, not ABC, but that own local ABC affiliate stations, Sinclair and Nexstar, they go on the record basically virtue signaling to the Trump administration, we're going to take this guy off the air. We think it's distasteful. The parent network needs to do something about it. And then ABC makes this announcement. Now, what's interesting there is that the business model of broadcasting has changed a lot in the last 25 years. I used to work in the broadcasting industry. It used to be immensely profitable. So you go back to the 70s and the 80s and the 90s. I knew broadcasters that owned one TV station that had private jets. Okay, broadcasting, you used to be able to make net profit margins above 50% if you owned a TV station. All right, it's not like that anymore. Streaming hurt it. The internet hurt it. The decline in advertising revenue to broadcasters that started with the Great Recession really, really started pinching. You can still make money in broadcasting, but now you have to have scale. So these companies, Nexstar and Sinclair, have been basically on buying sprees, buying all kinds of television stations whenever they're up for sale. And that's how they're able to make their money. If they have a lot of scale, they can share content across channels and that kind of thing. All right. So the industry has kind of changed. But the thing is that both the FCC and the FTC, the Federal Trade Commission, have to give approval whenever these companies merge. So if Nexstar makes a bid for a 10-station group, they have to get regulatory approval. So it's pretty clear that Nexstar was trying to curry favor with the Trump administration for future mergers and acquisitions by basically, saying that they were no longer going to put Kimmel on the air on their stations. That was what Nexstar and Sinclair said. Sinclair, a little bit different. Sinclair is an ideologically conservative company. So the Sinclair affiliate in any market is usually the Republican affiliate in the market. So they may have believed what they were saying, but it's clear that both of them were probably using this opportunity to make the case that, they're going to be responsible for future mergers and acquisitions. Look at us, we're being responsible. We don't like Jimmy Kimmel, Mr. President, right? But again, the companies do it. That puts pressure on ABC. But ABC fired him so quickly, and it just doesn't make sense to me. So I think that what's going on actually has to do partially with what Kimmel said, but I think it also has to do with the changing economics of late night television. So if you go back and you look at what late night ratings were like 10, 15 years ago, they're down about 40%. Okay, so if you look at the numbers of The Tonight Show back then versus today, all those different shows across the board, with one exception, late night TV viewership is down. Now, the thing about late night shows is that in earlier days, they were cash cows for the network. And if you think about it, it makes perfect sense, right? There's one star that you got to pay a big salary, but you're producing it in a studio every day. The audience comes for free. The guests come for free. You know, you just have to have a good booker, a good executive producer to be able to, draw Tom Cruise or, some movie star that wants to promote something. But in terms of like the production versus the audience, they were super, super, super profitable. Okay, but especially if you compare it to like a full production, like a show like Lost, where you got to pay 20 TV stars and you have to have on-location shooting in Hawaii, and then you have to have two different, studio complexes in Hollywood to be able to shoot the indoor scenes and that kind of thing, right? So there are a lot of good economies for late night shows. However, if the audience goes down by 40%, I suspect that the advertising revenue probably also went down by something like 40%. Maybe the elasticity of advertising demand doesn't go down fully. Maybe it goes down more. I don't know. But I do know that those shows are making making less money for their parent companies today than they were 10 years ago. Now, here's the other thing. I also suspect that Jimmy Kimmel's salary has not gone down by 40% over the last 10 years. Okay? So what I suspect is that ABC saw an opportunity, basically an excuse to potentially get rid of a host that, number one, was causing trouble for them, but number two, may have stopped making money for the company, right? So one of the questions is like, why have the late night ratings gone down so much, right? So you may remember a couple months ago, Stephen Colbert they announced the end of his show on CBS. All right, and people were blaming, it's something that he said about Paramount, the company, in some lawsuit that they settled with Trump. CBS said, no, this is all about the money. The show's losing money now, all right? And what was interesting, the most interesting commentator that I heard about that came from Jay Leno, who of course was the legendary long-term host of The Tonight Show on NBC. He took over after Johnny Carson. And he said, of course you're gonna lose audience if you're only playing for half of the audience. And that was a direct critique of Colbert, who is so liberal because all of his jokes, he's a one-sided partisan comedian. And if that's your act every single night, you're going to lose 40 to 50% of your audience just because they don't want to, it's not funny to them, right? If you go back and you look at Leno was a liberal, all right? But his jokes were pretty much even-handed. They were probably more about Republicans and Democrats, but they were generally lighthearted, and he would poke fun at both sides. I remember him making a lot of fun of Bill Clinton in the 90s, okay? Colbert doesn't do that. Jimmy Kimmel, for Pete's sake, never does that. All right. So what these comedians have done in these shows is basically isolated themselves to an audience that's half the size of what they could have because of their political beliefs. Now, I mentioned that there was one TV show in the late night hours that has not gone down in ratings in the last 10 years, and that is Greg Gutfeld's show on Fox News. Now, it's not 100% comparable because he comes on at 10 o'clock instead of 11, but it's still instructive because Gutfeld's ratings have been increasing and they often outpace those of the broadcast networks. And what's interesting there is Gutfeld is a conservative, and Fox News, yet again, finds a market for comedy where nobody was playing. And then the same way as they found a market for news where nobody was playing, conservative-leaning news in the 1990s, they found a market for conservative-leaning comedy, and Greg Gutfeld all of a sudden becomes this sensation, right? I think that these companies are waking up to the fact that one-sided political dialogues in these comedy shows is not a business model that works anymore, all right? And I really 100% believe that if Jimmy Kimmel was making $50 million a year for ABC, they would have gone to the mat for him. They spent 4 years in litigation against the FCC over the Janet Jackson thing, and they dropped Kimmel in 6 hours. They wouldn't have done that if that guy was making money for him. I suspect that he was probably losing money for the network because of his high salary and their lower ratings, and this is a way for them to easily unload it. Maybe that's not the full reason, but I think it's probably partially the reason. because ABC it's owned by Disney. They have the resources to fight that. If they really wanted to, they would have, but they didn't. They chose not to, and I think that's probably why. So that's my ultra realist take on what I think is going on with the Jimmy Kimmel firing. Again, I think that the FCC weighing in on this is a terrible, horrible precedent. I hope that the Trump administration backs off. I suspect they won't, but I don't think that it was 100% about Brendan Carr and the FCC. I think it also had to do with the economics of late night television and the changing economics of broadcasting more broadly. So let me know what you think. Drop a comment, and thanks for watching.